Thank you. I think there are probably a few people who are better than me to give this story to you, but I'll do for today, right? Okay, so can we get the next slide up, please? So you can see that I worked at the Wall Street Journal because I'm one of these silly dot drawing things in my head. So I worked there for 10 years, and I just want to tell you a little story, which was about 2002. I'm always really behind on my paperwork. The head of human resources for the journal in Europe came to me, and we had a bit of a kind of fighty kind of conversation along the lines of, you know, why don't you ever get anything on time? And me being like, I'm very busy. Anyway, I could see her eyes were being drawn to the screen, and she said at the end of it, like, is that what I think it is? And I suddenly freaked out. You never know what you've got on your screen at work. And then I looked, and it's something that looked like this. Just next slide. It's a program called News Edge. In 2002, this was state of the art. It had news feeds from the AP, from Reuters, from Dow Jones. It was really quick, and you know, my job, I was a very junior person at the time, was just sit there looking at these bizarre headlines coming down and just making sure that we didn't miss anything big. You know, but I mean, it's surreal, right? It's like crack down on livery drivers. You know, you click on that, you wonder what on earth that is. It's all the world's information just coming in. And so I showed this to her and explained what it was, and I felt like someone, just from her face, I felt like someone who was explaining The Matrix to Keanu Reeves for the first time. It was just something that she had not experienced before or could see how it would really work. And what I find astonishing is that when I left the journal in 2010 and became a civilian, you know, just a regular citizen, I didn't miss the wires because I had Twitter. That costs nothing. And this costs tens of thousands of dollars for an institution. So, you know, I'll just get into the nitty-gritty of things in a moment, but I have one sort of little bit of philosophy about the news, which is that, you know, when I was leaving the journal, a lot of people were worried about the commodification of news. And I just think that's really incorrect. What's happened is that the tools of journalism have become commodified. Everyone has the kind of tools to explore the world's information if they want to, for basically almost no money at all for the price of an internet connection. What separates the journalist from everyone else is the imagination in the realm of facts, right? The imagination to discover facts, to discover trends, to arrange them in imaginative ways, to add depths to stories. That's what separates journalists from the civilians, not how much they spend on tools to make stories. So my part of the talk today is just to start with something very familiar to you all, which is this. Next slide, please. Hands up if you've ever used Google to search something. All right. Okay, some of you are not putting your hands up. All right. Okay, that's okay. Hands up if you've ever used Google to check the spelling of the name of someone. Okay. All right. This is we're going to take it up now. This is a region where there are a lot of naming conventions. Sometimes it's hard to know if someone's a man or a woman, if you're going to put Mr. or Mrs. in front of their name. How can you use Google to figure that out? Can I get a volunteer to tell me how to do that?
I did it yesterday. Give me the name of Google was telling me.
Oh, wow, I had a tricky one, but if it's just that simple, that's great. Anyway, so follow this guy. He'll be giving the next presentation. Another suggestion? Image search is actually the way I do it. Weirdly, it doesn't work so well for my name, Robin. I don't know why, it's such a man's name, but somehow women sometimes appear. But that's a really good trick. It's something that I found really annoying in this when I was a reporter. Is this person a Mr. or a Mrs.? The Wall Street Journal always had to put that honorific in. So let's just explore some of these more tricks that can just help you solve nightmarish problems in journalism really quickly. So next slide. So advanced search. We've got all these things of just narrowing your search. Don't forget, the laser cuts deeper because the light is narrower. Google has the most amazing amount of sites in its index in the billions. Each search query has to travel 1,500 miles from your computer. That's the average amount. And then this is what we're dealing with. As journalists, the main question for you is how to tunnel through that more efficiently, or at least that's what I would suggest you use Google for. So next slide. Let's just remind ourselves this is what it looks like. What I want to call to your attention is search tools. Just to the top left, up from the Singapore flag. That's your friend. You should be using that for a lot of things if you're not finding what you're looking for immediately. So on to the next slide. Let's, for instance, search by time and date. There was a helicopter crash in London, where I'm from. So if you search Google right now for helicopter crash, Google figures out that it's in the news. And it'll give you all the latest information. The top links will be related to the news of the moment. Now, let's say you want to have some context. When I heard this, I was like, that's crazy. Like, are the buildings really high enough for a helicopter to hit? How many helicopters are there? And so I was curious, you know, is this a common thing? So I just restricted it by date. That's how you do this. I told Google, just give me results from before January 2012, helicopter crash London. And you can see it's much more common than you might expect. Of course, you know, as reporters, you've got to look through this. Some of these just have a London dateline, but there was a big crash, it just seems like 2 or 3 years ago. And that was just cleared up, you know, in literally about 0.56 seconds. Next slide. That applies for all sorts of things. Images for figuring out if people are man or woman, figuring out where places are, things like that. Videos, if you search for videos in search, it won't just be YouTube videos. That's something really important for you to realize. It'll be anything that is a video on the web. So use that to limit things. Books, obviously. I thought I'd draw attention to patents, given that innovation is such a big key theme in Singapore right now. And I thought the other big key theme as a recent arrival is the amazing food. And I was like, well, I wonder how Singapore is innovating in cooking. So I typed Singapore cooking in. I narrowed it down to patents. And then this really leapt out at me. If you just go on to the next slide, there's some guy in Johor Bahru who's come up with a new technique for farming edible birds' nests. I thought that was pretty cool, and something I wouldn't have found if I'd have tunneled through almost immediately. I have to say the birds in these nests seem to lead a pretty horrible life in his invention. But anyway, I'm sure the nests are delicious. Next slide. Another good thing in this region, for reporters in this region, is you can search in any language. If you go to search tools and you type in translate foreign pages from all results, you can narrow it down. This is really awesome, especially if you were looking for news, say, in Cambodia, something like that, or something with a sort of language that not many people speak. I chose debt crisis because I figure, you know, if you want to talk debt crisis, it should be in all European languages, right? What is debt crisis in Greek? So this was sort of, I could have narrowed this down a little bit, but this gives you a range of where the site's coming in from: Spanish, French, Arabic, Russian. These get pushed to the fore in a new kind of ranking. So it's a very good way of getting out of your comfort zone and figuring out what people outside of your own language is saying. Next slide. I think if there are 2 words that I want for you to remember is site and file type. These are really sexy words. Could you try and say site now? Site, colon? Site, okay, one more time. Site, colon. Awesome. And now file type, colon. You guys have already got it. This is really a handy thing to do because by typing in site, colon, you get to search any kind of domain, which will narrow your, anytime you want to dig into a particular institution's expertise on a topic, or a particular newspaper's expertise on a topic, this is quite often the most efficient way to do it and the fastest way to do it. So I live out on the East Coast. I was curious to see what the Urban Redevelopment Authority had been doing in my area. So I just told it, just tell me all the results from this particular URL, from ura.gov.sg. You could do this for anything. You can search nasa.gov for space shuttle, and you can search Golden Globe for Jodie Foster. Just sort of newsy things that I thought of on the spur of the moment might be handy. You can go bigger than this, although still keeping it narrow. That's what I want to emphasize, is that you're suddenly carving out a chunk of the web and really burrowing into it as if it was your own private database. So next slide, please. You can go bigger and just say a domain. You can do .sg and say, I only want to search websites that are registered in Singapore. You can say .edu.sg, any university. I want to know anything to come from any university in Singapore. Gov would be the US government. .co.uk. Let's say you wanted to know what British corporations are thinking about Singapore. The way I would do that would be to do site:/co.uk and type in Singapore as my first step, just to figure out what every company was promoting on its website on Singapore. And then I'd start narrowing it down from there. So this particular example is I was curious to know, you know, when he was confessing to having this, I was like, how much does it cost to get Lance Armstrong's body? And it wouldn't be good enough to know in US dollars, because I'm here in Singapore. So what I did was I just reasoned that the government would probably have some of this information just because it's got so many health insurance claims that it has to process. So I did gov.sg, I searched for the full name of the drug, and I put in a $sign. And of course, it's indicated for, I guess, kidney failure normally. So I guess that it's $200 per person. I don't know how much the amount is, but that might be a first step to figuring out roughly what the cost of his drugs were. If you wanted to start just letting your readers know that this was like a luxury good or not. Obviously, it's more expensive than aspirin, right? And more effective if you're a cyclist. Next slide. This is really where things are kind of awesome. You can also search by file type. Can you say file type again? All right, this is really awesome. It's really important. This allows you to, quite often, governments put their best information into PDF files that they bury in their site or doc files that they bury, and it's really hard to find. Their own internal search tools don't figure out where they are. You can basically say, give me any kind of spreadsheet on this site, and I guarantee you're going to come up with some kind of gold. This isn't necessarily gold, but I just picked out a news item this morning. There was a contraband seizure of cigarettes. I was curious to know how much this was an issue in Singapore, how much it costs. So I just searched for cigarettes and then .xls. And it's pretty handy in the sense that all of a sudden you get a range of spreadsheets, essentially, giving you a huge range of different kinds of statistics. I just did a quick search through 10 pages, basically, and you could find databases on the amount that had been seized over the past 10 years, that kind of thing. Also, how much it was costing the Singapore economy, all laid out in number form so I could make a big chart. My first job at the Wall Street Journal, by the way, was to convince recalcitrant reporters that they should give us statistics so we could put pretty charts by their pictures. Here I am 12 years later convincing journalists to get statistics to make charts again. I guess I haven't developed at all. But it was very hard. I guess my main takeaway is that in 2000, it was very hard for people to do this. It was a real nightmare. No one really wanted to do it. No one saw the value of it. Now it's like a 5-minute job if you use these tools, which are really handy, really good, and really quick. So next slide, please. Here's a journalist who actually put this to work. Guy in San Antonio. I think his name is something Tedesco. I forget his first name. He was curious as to, he just basically searched for accidents in his local government website and then file type doc. You see, site colon file type, and what came up? He suddenly realized that the local government must have had some procedure where if you had a report, if a government employee had an accident, they had to file some kind of Word document report, which the government had then forgotten about. He then did a FOIA request, which is the way you get information from the government. And then, next slide, please. I think that's right. Wrote this whole story about, it was pretty brutal, about government employees hitting people in cars and why that had happened. Just a quote from the story, no one outside City Hall had ever looked at this data before. Thanks to a nifty Google search, now everybody can. I mean, it wasn't necessarily a scandal, but it allowed the government itself to discover a few things about itself that it didn't know before. So that's something that would be unimaginable 12 years ago, a reporter from outside City Hall telling City Hall what was in its own files. Next slide, just to round out this, note down this URL or take a photo of this. This is an online course taught by probably the ideal guy to give this course. Is this guy, Dan Russell, who's the power searcher is his term. He trains you to become a power searcher on an online course. It's super amazing. One thing that really struck me is he does this thing where he puts up a photo of a building, just that, and he says, how do you get the phone number to this building? How do you call someone inside this building? And just think about how you might do that, but he'll show you how you can do that with Google. And he's full of these tricks like that. So we just have a short amount of time. For further education, please check out that site and sign yourself up. It's full of so many wicked smart, kind of amazing things to help you with your reporting. So on to trends now. Finding trends with Google. We've got a few ways to do that. Next slide. This is a URL to remember, google.com/trends. It's a new tool. It unifies a lot of disparate things that used to be on separate sites before. Next slide. So let's do a brief history of the 5 Cs. I always forget. I always name 4 out of 5. But let me see if I can remember. It's cash, condo, country club, car, and credit card. All right. So let's say I sense that there's some anxiety about whether Singapore is still about the 5 Cs or not, right? Is something in the air? Is it something people still care about? Is it what defines the ambitions of Singaporeans? So let's see how Google Trends might go some way to answering that question. Not a comprehensive answer, but might give you some statistical balance to what might just be an opinion otherwise. So next slide. So here we've got the 5 Cs. I put in BMW because I figured that was much more in the zone of 5 Cs than car. If you're gonna go that route, right? No insult to Kia, but I kind of felt like that was the one to put in there. And what struck me was, number one, what a difference the financial crisis made, probably, and what a difference the boom in property prices made. You can basically see that up until about 2008, the 5 Cs are trundling along together. They're very much unified. And then around about 2008, something happened. It would be up to you to find it out as journalists, but you can pretty much see condo became huge, top of mind for people, and credit card. Interestingly, country club has gone down a bit, and cash has not come down a bit. So what would that mean for people on the ground? It just seems like money and lending is more on people's minds. So let's go to the next slide. This pretty much confirms that, right? You can see that people are searching for credit cards way more than they're searching for ways to save, way more than they're searching for mortgages, even to my surprise. Next slide. And now we're on to our 6th C, which is cooling measure, right? Big moment. I noticed that a lot of news reports, when the new stamp duty came in, sort of rushed out to various condo development areas and said, are you empty? Did everyone come in on Saturday, right? And that's one way to report it anecdotally. Here's a way to see that played out, how that played out across the internet. There were 2 moments in the past 2 years where people suddenly freaked out about stamp duty to the point that they were searching about it more than mortgages. So clearly it got people's attention. And this spike, you can see, is way bigger than the last spike. So this isn't comprehensive. This doesn't prove necessarily everything, but it does allow you to say as journalists that whatever the government did, whatever government announcement made, it made people think about stamp duty more than mortgages. So you've got some statistical basis to say that much, at least. What's in the back of people's minds? Next slide. Maybe for cars, we'll see the same thing. You can see that pretty much people search for COE on a cyclical basis, as you might expect. Next slide. And you can see that it's made a difference to Hyundai and Toyota. Now, maybe that's just a brand issue. You don't know. But it does sound like people are at least searching for cars a little bit less, and that people are searching for COE more than Hyundai, which is a bit depressing if you're Hyundai. But it's probably what the government wants in the end. Next slide. All right. Or maybe the slide after that even. Okay, so here's a different one. This was a surprise to me. I was going to do a New Year's one because there's a cool thing you can do in Australia. It doesn't quite hold here, which is you search for vodka and you search for hangover. And you can see that the 2 are exactly matched, but they're kind of like a day apart, right? Like you can see the spikes coming up at the same time. So I tried doing that for Singapore. It didn't work. And I was like, so I looked for beer. And I was knocked out by this. Does anyone know what this spike is? Any suggestions? I had to Google it, obviously. Well, anyone want to shout it out? Beer Fest. It's got to be it. It's Beer Fest. So I say that's a real credit to Beer Fest. If it's making people search for beer way more than they do on New Year's Eve, like all credit to them. So if you were to write a story about Beer Fest, you might want to give them credit for that. Every year there's a gigantic spike in traffic when this show comes to town. So that's basically just a way just to show you guys that you can back up sort of stuff that's in the ether otherwise, stuff that might be anecdotal. It doesn't give you the whole story, but it gives you enough of the trends, the sense of where people are, that you can at least have an actual justification to say people in Singapore are thinking about X at a particular time and relative to other things. Next slide. And then the last part of this section is on flu trends. Basically, when you have the flu, what do you search for? You search for runny nose, you search for massive headache, you search for paracetamol. Some engineers figured out that you could figure out what terms people were searching for round about a time a flu epidemic hit. And because people search data comes in way more quickly than medical data to the local government, were used by the World Health Organization and other bodies to figure out when a flu might hit about a week before than they might know otherwise. In the US, by the way, this line has absolutely spiked over the past few weeks. So we'll see if Google is right about that, but it's way higher than it has been in previous years. Just to give you a sense in the context of this, don't freak out. This is actually like 2007, way back when. You can see that Singapore is currently in a code yellow. I guess it's kind of like the George Bush Homeland Security kind of color coding system or something like that. So we're fine. But I just wanted to pick out a particularly bad year, which turns out to be 2007, and if you look at other years, it's basically flat. You can do this across Southeast Asia. This is actually for dengue trends, which is what we focus on in this region because it kind of makes more sense than just regular influenza. So these are the trends, and these are the ways to search for. Just to sum up, 2 words you need to remember are what? File type, yeah, and awesome. Trends is at google.com/trends, and then flu trends, just Google it. It'll be easy to find. The URL is a bit tricky to type in. So got 5 minutes for questions before we go on to the next session. Any questions? Yeah.
Site, right? Does it search any part of the domain name?
No, that's basically it. It searches. Sorry, the question, in case anyone is watching on the internet, was does it limit its searches? And it's anything that's publicly available on that domain name. Now, one obvious thing about Google is that if you have a certain text file called robots.txt on your site, we won't crawl that. So if sites do that, we don't crawl that information, which is why you might not see information in Google sometimes. And also, if you don't want to see information appearing on Google, that's the way to do it. That's the way to shut it off with just 8 keystrokes. But beyond that, if it's something people want to have on the web and are making available on the web, we've crawled it as far to the best of our ability, and we'll retrieve as much information from that domain name as possible.
How do you get rid of the personalization and change your country? I see the country thing there. It says Singapore.
Yeah, you want to search from Indonesia and things like that.
The United States, Canada, or something.
Yeah, the best way to do that is I know exactly what you're doing and I know exactly what your issues are. Go to advanced search. Basically, just type in Google advanced search. Most of what I showed you, you could do using search tools. This was a very smart exception because we got a bit more smart about where you are and things like that. It can be kind of hard to trick Google into thinking you're somewhere else. So don't bother about that. Just go to advanced search, and then you have exactly that. There's a field that says sites from a country, and then you just type it in.
Permanently change it. So that, say, when I search gun control,
Yeah.
I'm not interested in Singapore. I'm interested in Canada or the U.S. You can't change your location like that.
Yes, you can by doing advanced search. I mean, basically, you're just saying, give me searches from that country, from Canada, and that's
You have to do it for every search.
Yes, yeah. Blue scarf, sorry.
My question is about the acceptability to sub-editors, marketers, news organizations that have it. You say everyone should use this, obviously it's a step. But is a sub going to say, well, Google Trends, is that enough? What kind of verification?
Yeah, I would never recommend using trends on its own, just as I would never recommend using any single source on its own.
Do you find it really helpful? For example,
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, we've helped journalists, and if you ever want help on something like this, use these tools to figure out all sorts of things. There was one time in Australia where there was a certain search that just spiked, and a journalist came to us and they were like, "Why is this at the top of your trending your trending searches for this area, and we didn't know. We looked it up. We sort of, using just these tools, anyone can do them, but we just helped that journalist figure out that it was actually related to compensation from either the bushfires or some similar disaster that had happened at the time, and that actually led to a company getting basically being exposed as kind of heroic and really helping people out after this. No one had really known about it. It just appeared in Google. Now, they had to do a lot of extra reporting. They had to go to the country. They had to go on the ground. So as a discovery tool, I recommend you use it. Let me ask you this: is if a company's share price goes up, have you proved that it's awesome? No. You need to do a bit more than that. You need to look at its revenue. You need to look at its profit. You would never just cite the share price as the one single factor proving that this company is best. Similarly, with the 5 C's example I gave you, obviously this doesn't show much about whether Singapore is really shifting, but it's striking, right? And you can at least you can quantify something about intention. You would have to match that to all sorts of other data before you could do it. But my basic point is this data probably should be part of that story because it's just so handy, right? It just captures so many things that are out in the air otherwise. Sorry, next question.
Search tools work slightly differently on Google Mobile?
Yeah, you won't get. I mean, like Google. I mean, you won't get these tools. Basically, you can if you go on the web version, you can, and you can filter. But some of the most powerful stuff you can't do. Now, yeah, if you're in a taxi, you can use this. You can use the text modifiers I told you. You can use that on a mobile phone just fine. Personally, I find that it's just better on a desktop because you kind of end up flicking through things, going backwards and forwards between sites. When I'm doing these kind of things myself, I'm generally kind of really intensively going through a bunch of sites, trying to get ideas, and I find one thing leads to another. And for now, that's best done on a tablet or a desktop. Yeah.
If I switch to classic view, I can still do it.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, these tools are fantastic, but I'd like to pick your brain on the new announced Facebook graph search.
I think you can ask them in terms of like this is a presentation on Google search for journalists, right? So Facebook search for journalists, I can't imagine that you wouldn't use it, right? Just as you wouldn't use LinkedIn for other things. So I haven't used it myself. Has anyone, by the way, has anyone used it yet? I would love to hear from you if you've used it. Yeah, but I think you can sign up for it, and has anyone managed to get it yet? No. Okay, well, I mean that's that. I haven't used it, and I'm not an expert on it. Yeah.
If I've got a keyword phrase like stamp duty or stop smoking, is there any way to draw down for demographic or psychographic data?
I mean, as in people who are searching for this, no, there isn't. When I do the YouTube presentation, YouTube has much better demographic data because it's a lot more like television. But for searches, it's not something we would basically share. I mean, I could find ways you could probably cheat that, probably based on sites they might be searching, that kind of thing. But that would be tricky to do with Google, frankly. Yep.
Do you have anything that mechanizes the searches? So if you want to do, you go into an advanced search and you set up your filters or whatever, you hit search, but you don't want to do that each time. You want to set for weekly or monthly.
Yes, that's a really great. The way to do that is via Google News. Basically, you can't quite lose some of the functionality I talked about, but if you go to Google News, it's kind of hidden, but it's a really cool tool that I use a lot, and basically it allows you to save for a news search, and then I just set that. Now it'll miss some of the stuff I was talking about up here, so you're right. You're going to lose some of the, maybe a spreadsheet has popped up on some website that you're really interested in. But what I recommend you do is after this, you go to news.google.com, you hunt around for the words news alert, just basically Control F. By the way, if you guys aren't using Control F on your browser, use that. Quite often Google points you to a site and you say, why was I sent to this site? The next step is to do Control F, which will basically search with your browser will then search within that page, and you'll find that what you were looking for was halfway down the page. That's a really actually good trick. But to go back to your question, the best way to do that is via news alerts. Yes, sorry, in the back.
Why are you stopping iGoogle? Is personalization not popular?
Oh, I mean, again, that's sort of like a. Do you like iGoogle? Are you one of these people who's sad to see it go? Yeah, yeah. My mum as well was upset. Yeah. Okay, sorry. So the question was, why did we stop iGoogle? I mean, basically, in the end, just a new direction. We just had to retire stuff that wasn't really moving the needle, and there's Google Plus instead. Next question. Yes. Using tips for using Google email in China. Oh, tips for using Google in China. Well, I mean, we're there in China in the sense of, do you live in China? I mean, basically, we have the .co.hk domain available, accessible in China. Oh, sorry, yeah. Oh, you went.
Yeah, because when I use Google in China, it can be very slow, and sometimes just can open the site.
Yeah, so the question was sometimes Google in China is very slow. Tips for using it? I mean, that's basically it. We've got the .co.hk site, and that's what we can make available in China outside of a VPN, which would be what you would. I mean, if you want to, obviously, if you want to access a site that's illegal in China, you know how to do it better than I do. Any other questions? Okay. We're still waiting for, is that any other questions? No? And I think...
just give us 2 minutes downloading your presentation for the Hangout. Or do you have your presentation there? The Hangout, the online people.
Sure.
They just ask.
Yeah, we can do that afterwards if you want.
Just set it up.
Okay, cool. In the meantime, should I just do the YouTube presentation? Yeah, I mean, because we've got... Well, is Anthony on? It doesn't look like Anthony is on yet. Okay, so I guess we're exhausted with questions. Why don't I ask you guys a few questions? Is that okay? Is it all right if I ask journalists some questions? How about this? Can I just ask how many of you use Google Maps? All right. How many of you use Google Maps embedded on your news site? Out of curiosity. Not many. Okay. How many of you did stop that because Google started charging for high-end users? Okay, well that's good. Okay, so one person did it. Okay, was that because you started getting charged, or because you were worried about getting charged? Curiosity.
It's not a news application. It's compliance.
Okay, cool. All right. So, by the way, just for the people I mean, I think everyone saw the hands. That was for people at home. Google Maps can be pretty good for reporting as well. Very few people get charged. Especially if you're a blogger or something like that, or you're just starting out. There's almost no chance that you'll get charged for using Google Maps. Consider using it especially for mashups and things like that if you want to do something cool. I mean, that'll be a presentation for maybe another day if you guys want to come back. But Anthony's going to be talking about some pretty astonishing stuff that you can do with Google Maps, and it's definitely worth using. Okay, another question related to the presentation following Anthony's in Australia. How many of you have a YouTube channel? All right, so about 30%. How many of you upload videos to YouTube? All right. How many of you upload videos of your family to YouTube? All right. That was very few, okay? How many of you upload your serious thoughts on the world today and your reporting on YouTube? For those of you online, really no one is holding up their
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. I'm just going to mute myself.
Oh, haven't we all wanted to hear that?
All right, take it away.
Hi, guys. I'm Anthony Baxter. I'm from the... Oh, sorry, I just accidentally knocked a phone off the hook here. I'm from the Google Sydney office. I'm a crisis response engineer. So I work on sort of Google's crisis response project. We deal with disasters. Bushfires, floods, cyclones, earthquakes, and the like. We work on getting information online and making it available to the world. This talk's actually not directly about disasters. It's about data-driven journalism. It's about how to sort of make your journalism more punchy through the use of data. So I'm just going to attempt now to switch to my talk. Oh, where did it go? Hello, where's Keynote gone? 2 seconds. It's technology. It's great, isn't it? Oh, there we go. So let's do that. Okay, you can currently see yourself. Oops. So let's jump to the slides. Okay. So yeah, data-driven journalism. What we're talking about here is... Sorry, I just need to get my notes up. It means lots of different things to different people. I'm giving the talk, so I'll decide what it means. In this case, it's about engaging users, making your pages, sort of more compelling, make your information on the web more compelling. It allows people to actually drill into the data themselves and tell their own stories. If we go to Wikipedia, their definition says that it's a data-driven journalistic process based on analyzing and filtering large data sets for the purposes of creating a new story. In this case, the word story is the one I want to concentrate on. This is data-driven journalism is not anything particularly new. Like most journalism, it's just about telling stories. When I was a little kid, my parents were sent away for a book. I think it was some sort of book about where you was with Santa Claus and the reindeer. And what you could do was you'd give your children's name, and it would actually they create a book which actually had your child's name as the hero of the story. So Anthony helped Santa save Christmas, kind of thing. And this was great. It was like a story about me. I thought that was fantastically fun, and just so wonderful. So what we're doing here with the data-driven journalism is just helping people tell stories that relate directly to themselves. That's one of the things, one of the more powerful parts of it. We don't really have enough time in a sort of half-hour talk to go through, how to do all this. So instead, I'll just give you some examples, and hopefully they'll inspire you. I'll get Robin or someone there to send through a list of links to these various examples later on. Just before we get to the examples, though, a bit of backstory. The way it used to work with sort of, say, government data or any of that sort of data was you'd go and you'd queue up and you'd wait for the data to be released on paper, and then you'd go back and you'd sit down and you'd read it and you'd write it up and try to do a story out of it. Then we got Excel, and people would instead email you out a spreadsheet full of the data, so you could actually do it from your desk, and it was a lot more efficient. And then we got a bunch of other tools. There's Google Refine, there's Google, shared spreadsheets, so you can actually collaborate on doing this stuff. There's the Microsoft shared spreadsheets. There's all sorts of these tools out there that let you just work together on collaboratively making stories up, or not even making them up, but discovering stories in the data. And there's also now lots and lots of other agencies out there producing data. Apologies, there's a lot of Australian ones here because they're the ones I'm most familiar with, but there's also the Singapore's data.gov.sg, which is their data portal, which has an enormous amount of data available for covering all sorts of things, whether it be real estate, whether it be land prices. There's just massive numbers of these data sets out there for you to actually drill into and find out what's going on and tell interesting stories. And the actual amount of computer power nowadays is really not that much of a problem to process it either. I mean, most of you have a cell phone. 10 years ago, that would be, as fast, the power in that cell phone is what a sort of high-end server was 10 years ago. And these days, people like Google, Amazon, Rackspace, Microsoft, everyone have systems available where you can just put a couple of bucks in a slot and buy yourself a bunch of server time for a few hours to do some number crunching if you need to. And the tools themselves are getting easier and easier to use. So once you've got this data, the next major step, which is really important, is actually visualizing the data. Now, this is from a book by a guy called Edward Tufte, and this is a map of Napoleon's march on Moscow. Now, this graph is one of the more, or this map is one of the more compelling and interesting data visualizations ever. There's a huge amount of data sort of showing on this particular map. That the width of the line is the size of the army and the path it took when he marched on Moscow and then had to retreat. And so you can sort of see on the left-hand side, the sort of brown color, there's a massive fat line of his huge army, and then you can see a bit branching off, and there's all this sort of information. You can see the battles, and you can see how it shrank over time. And this one particular map just shows such a vast amount of information. And this is one of the key challenges of doing data journalism. It's not enough just to put up a big table of numbers. You need to do it in a way that people can actually relate to and people can sort of get. And so we'll move on to some of the more concrete examples of this. One of the organizations that's doing this better than almost anyone in the world right now is The Guardian, a UK newspaper. There's a few examples I'll show from here. Now this one there was a bunch of riots last year. And this was about trying to figure out what might have triggered these riots. So they had all sorts of data on a map and then linked it into where the people were rioting. So you could actually drill down and see, how did different things like poverty relate to where the rioting was. And you could actually drill into your own area and drill into your own neighborhoods and see what was going on in your area. And you could actually sort of make your own judgments onto how much these different factors affected the riots. Another one they did, which I think is really quite interesting, was about looking at the CNN effect. This is the term in disaster relief, where any disaster that's on CNN or BBC World Service or whichever major news service is out there, whether it be Al Jazeera or the like, suddenly gets a lot more attention. And so what they wanted to see was whether the Somali famine from 2 years ago was actually, whether the money that flowed in was related to whether it was on CNN. And so what they did was they mapped sort of the amount of money, the donations coming in, to the amount of mentions in the media. And if you look, you can see there's actually a pretty compelling sort of linkage there between when it started getting media mentions and people starting to pay attention and donate money. And the thing is, they could have just told that story themselves. They could have just said, yes, we've looked at it and we found that that's true. But instead what they did was they showed their working. They put this up and so you can actually look at it and go, oh, yes, there is a clear linkage here. And so this is one of those really compelling things where it's not just about telling a story and asserting, sort of proof by assertion of we say it's true because it's true. Instead, what they did was they showed the data and they said, look, here's what you can see. And then they've still got the journalists having to actually contextualize the data. It's not just enough to put up a graph and go, look, you can see the results. They've actually explained what it means, but at the same time, they're not just relying on people taking it on faith that they've actually said that. And this is actually a really important thing for sort of the future of journalism, is that people want to be able to drill in. When you see a news article, and I'm sure many of you have discovered this, where they'll be discussing a report and you're reading a web version of the news article, I'm always like, where's the hyperlink to the report? It's online. Why do I have to go and look for it? Why can't you just put a link in so I can actually check, if I'm interested, I can read more? And this is one of those things that's going to become more and more important as we go on into the future, is people aren't going to be willing to just sit there and take what the journalists say as an assert. They want to actually see the results. This is another great example. This is a blog on the New York Times. This guy, Nate Silver, started as a baseball analyst and then moved into politics. to, with all the different polls out there, tie them together and produce a big picture view of what was going on in the recent US elections. And he actually pretty much nailed it. But one of the things was he actually discussed how he was getting his results. He actually talked about his processes and and gave links to the data so you could actually do the test yourself. You could actually go, oh, I'm not sure I believe him. And some people did that. You know, there was a bunch of people who produced sort of their own takes on it to varying levels of success because they disagreed with his methodology or the like. But the thing here is that he wasn't just, you know, like a lot of the sort of political pundits all around the world asserting that obviously this is the result, I think, who's going to win. Instead, what he said was, here's why I think it is, and here's the data that backs my assertions as to what is going on. And if people disagreed, they could drill into it. And this is a great thing. I'd much rather read something like this rather than someone who's, you know, been on television for 20 years and hasn't, you know, doesn't show they're working. Instead, they just assert, you know, based on, well, I've spoken to a couple of people I can't name, and I think this is the result. Instead, this sort of data-driven analysis of showing people what's going on is far more compelling. Maybe, I mean, I'm a technologist, so maybe I'm biased, but certainly a lot of other people seem to think so. I mean, the New York Times hired Nate Silver for this reason. Here's another one, ProPublica, another organization doing a huge amount of great work in this area. They produced, there was a foreclosure deal with a bunch of major banks agreed to pay a lot of money, and it was split out amongst the states. And various states did different things with the money. And so they had an overall big picture view of the whole country, and then you could drill down to your individual state and see what was going on. So you know, it's both the big picture and also telling stories that people can relate directly to people. So they can pull it in and go, right, this is what's going on in my area. An Australian one, we had a major political scandal about, there was a program to help people get home insulation in. And there was a big claim, there was a whole bunch of journalists claiming that this had led to a massive outbreak in fires. And eventually a blogger for one of the independent news services here sat down and crunched the numbers and found that, in fact, there wasn't a massive extra outbreak in fires. It was just that there was so many more installations going on that, in fact, the fire risk had gone down, but there was just so many more installations going on that the overall number of fires went up. And this is suddenly, oh, okay. In fact, all of the stories going on so far about this particular scandal had turned out to be based on a false premise. Another one from an Australian newspaper where they dug into the road toll, the traffic accidents, road tolls, and allowed you to drill down to your local government area and see how it had varied over time. So again, you had the big picture, the whole graph showing everything, the whole state, but then you could also drill down and see what's going on in my local town. How has the road toll been changing around where I live? Yet another map-based one. This is done by the SF Bay Guardian, and it was a list of where bicycle accidents had occurred around San Francisco. And so they've actually mapped that and then marked all the hotspots. And you can see in the middle there, I've sort of highlighted it in a sort of vaguely reddish box. There's one of the streets, Valencia Street, which just had an enormous amount of, it was a massive bicycle hotspot accident sort of zone, where every intersection pretty much had accidents. And this then led to the San Francisco city government taking action on that. But at the same time, people can look at that and go, oh, maybe I won't ride my bike down there because I don't want to get run over by a car. And again, this is just taking all the data that was available. All this data about where the bicycle accidents was available. It was just a matter of putting it on a map to show people what's going on. So suddenly people who thought, oh, Valencia Street, if you're a cyclist, you might go, oh, that's always been a bit hairy. It's a bit scary as a road to ride along. You can look at this and go, well, yes, it is. There's actually been a lot of accidents on that street, and maybe I'll choose a different street. Another one, which was quite cool, was again, Australian, sorry, this is where I'm from, so I know this area better. The government put out a map, or put out data showing the sort of relative strengths and weaknesses of various schools. And they did it in a way that made it hard for people to compare the schools. They didn't want people to do that. And of course, everyone wanted to do that. So what would happen was one of the various news services and the like would take the data and then put it on a map so you could actually make judgments on how is your school doing compared to the one up the road, or when you maybe looking to choose a school for your child, you could actually compare different schools and see how they went. This made the government quite annoyed because they didn't want people to be able to do this. But I think it was Mark Twain quote something on journalism is telling people what the government doesn't want to hear. Everything else is propaganda. There is a bit of that, but it's still just a really compelling sort of use case of being able to show people what's going on in their area, and people can drill down and go, it's the school that my kids go to is actually pretty good, or it's not. Maybe I'll chase it up with the school administrators and ask why they're not doing as well as the other surrounding schools. We do this thing called the Google Transparency Report, where we let people know when we've had sort of takedown requests from, say, copyright, people complaining about copyright infringement, or data requests from the names of users or the like. We don't actually do any journalism about this. We just put this information out there, and then what happens is the various local news services actually look at how their country's done, and if say their country happens to be a particular hotspot, say like the United Kingdom, people will actually go to the local government and go, why is our government doing so many more requests for data than the country next door? So this is all about, we've just made the data available, and the data itself drives the journalism. It actually there's a whole lot of stories embedded in this data that don't necessarily, people may not have realized what's going on, but once you see the data, people can then drill in and go, okay, right, this is what's going on. Why is this happening? As I mentioned, there's data.gov.sg, which I've been poking around in, and just has an enormous amount of data available for you to actually drill into this stuff. There's environment data, as I say, we can see, this is just the top of the screenshot, you can sort of see there's a huge number of different government departments all putting data sets out there. And this data actually, there's all sorts of stories buried in this data that people may not have discovered yet. It's great. Massive congratulations to the Singapore government for this service. It's just a huge amount of this data out there. So you can actually you might have an idea for a story and you want to actually check, is this valid or am I just guessing? There's another example which I don't actually have screenshots for, which was the local casino here runs a free bus service to take people to the casino, and a local student, Sydney student, took the maps of that bus routes and sort of pulled down the Australian census data and overlaid that on where the bus routes were, and found that in fact the buses all went to the lower sort of socio-economic suburbs with a high proportion of Chinese-speaking immigrants. And it was pretty much a one-to-one mapping, and so that then led to some sort of interesting questions to the casino about why they were doing this, and was it in fact a little bit predatory. This was just, again, somebody took the map and had an idea, and then sort of mapped it up against different factors until they've tried to figure out a correlation that might be interesting. And this is the sort of thing that's out there with this data, is there's always this great sort of information out there that you can actually find out, find out what's going on. So my job, as I mentioned at the start, is the Google Crisis Response Team. It's part of Google's philanthropic google.org. It's part of the business, so it's not the money-making part of the business. What we do is we get this data about emergencies and put it online. And we put it online in a way that millions and millions of people can see. This was the very first time I got involved in this area, which was the Black Saturday bushfires, which were about 4 years ago, where about 200 people died in fires in Victoria. At the time, the data was available, but it wasn't on a map. It was just a list of place names. And so people couldn't actually see where the fires were in relation to their loved ones. I know where my little brother lives. I know the name of the town he lives in Victoria, but I don't know the towns around him. So if, say, there was a town five kilometres down the road that had a fire, it'd be on the website just listed by the name of that local town. Once you put it on a map, people can look at it and go, oh, okay, that's where the fires are. This is incredibly important for people being able to see what's going on, both for their friends and family and loved ones, but as well, they want to be able to actually just find out for themselves, am I in danger? We've done that subsequently with other disasters. We will get satellite imagery, for example, and put it online so people, both the public, the media, and emergency responders can find out what's going on. So we were able to get imagery of after the Christchurch earthquake and put it online. Recently, of course, we had the Hurricane Sandy in New York, where we were pulling data down pretty much straight away, imagery, and putting it online so people could see what was going on. In a lot of cases, people have been evacuated and they couldn't actually see what the situation was in their area because they couldn't get there. Here's another one which was sort of a really both compelling story, but also incredibly useful. After the Japan earthquake, we worked with Honda. Their in-car GPS systems would actually periodically send back where the car was and what speed it was doing. And normally Honda use this for working out where there's traffic jams. So there might be a choice of 2 highways, and they'll go, well, based on the speed of the cars on this highway, we think we'll say, our navigation system will say, go down the other one because it's clearly been an accident or something's going on in that other highway. So they were able to then sort of provide that data sort of suitably grouped together so it was anonymized because it's just everyone. It wasn't identifying individual cars or the like, and made it available to us so we could put it online as a map and show people which roads were passable. You know, there was all sorts of disclaimers. We're not saying anything about the quality of the roads. All we're saying is yesterday some vehicles were able to get along that. And this was incredibly important in the immediate aftermath of Fukushima, the Sendai quake, because the people didn't know what roads were open because the local governments, you know, their websites were down because they had no power or in some cases didn't have buildings. So we were able to put this up online and let people find out what's going on. But it also tells stories. You can see that big grey area just there? That's actually the exclusion zone around the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. So, you know, there's all these sort of stories out there that are embedded in data, and you may not know about them until you actually start digging in and visualizing the data, and suddenly these stories pop up. And then you also get sort of little weird stories. So here's a zoomed in version of that previous map. You can see that the lines don't quite match up. The pink is congestion. So you can see here what's happened is the cars have had to go up to the Y intersection and turn around and go back the other way. When we overlaid up-to-date satellite imagery on there, the reason for that is you can see there's a big boat that's landed on the road. And it shouldn't be there, obviously, but that's a good reason for why the cars have had to turn around and go back the other way. Obviously, the boat is something of a traffic hazard. And we've done this over and over again. You know, we did this during the floods in Australia a couple of years ago, where we were taking the flood levels and putting them on a map and showing people what was going on in an area. And the individual flood stations all had, you know, numbers, but once you actually map them and put them online, suddenly you can see a much bigger picture of where the flooding is. And as the water moved down the river, you could see the various areas over the course of days. You could see where as the flooding moved. And then it's things like when Cyclone Yazi hit, we'll pull data in, and we did this recently again with Typhoon Bofa, or Pablo, in Mindanao. We were constantly updating the map, showing where the typhoon was, where the flooding was, and trying to let people know what was going on. This is actually Hurricane Irene, which was the cyclone that hit New York about 1.5 years ago. And again, we put this imagery up online and let people know what was going on. And we were taking data with the evacuations data and the like and putting it up there for people to see. And we actually try to make this data available to everyone. So we make it very easy to share the data. This is one from Hurricane Sandy, which was showing the state of the subway system and the replacement bus routes that had been put in place. But we make it so that everyone can actually share a custom view of the map. So they've managed to, if you like, tell their own story. They can zoom in on their neighborhood and then share that map of that custom view of the map with their friends on Facebook or Google Plus or Twitter and go, hey, if you want to know what's going on near me, here's a map showing my area. So you can find out, you can sort of save that information off for future use. And that comes back to what I was saying before about telling your own personal stories. And our maps are designed to help people find out what's relevant to them and share it with the people that they want to know about it, but as well to take the big picture view and see here's the overall state of the world of this particular disaster. And these maps were embedded in sort of most of the major news services around the world websites at various points. This is another hurricane, with the one that hit New Orleans last year. Again, we were able to put information out about showing where there were evacuation zones, what was going on. Where was the flooding, what was the road situation, so people could actually see in one big picture view what's going on. And again, this is just, if you like, this is just data journalism. I'm not a journalist, we're web professionals, but to a certain extent, once you've got this data and you can put it up there in such a compelling way, where you've bundled all the different data sources together, you can start to tell stories, you can start to see what's going on, and you can start to explain to people what's going on. By the way, when you are doing this stuff, this is sort of another little bit of data journalism that came out of our data journalism. This is the percentage of users for Hurricane Isaac down south who were using the maps from a mobile phone. And suddenly we've got an interesting story to tell where we can go to people in a disaster. It makes sense that people are looking from their mobile because the power's out, or they're on the road because they're evacuating. They're not sitting in front of their desktop. They're not sitting at home on their laptop. Instead, they're looking at a mobile. And so we were then able to go out and say to people, hey, by the way, you should think about this in a disaster situation. You know, we can show that it's really important that you make sure your stuff works on mobile. And so again, this is just sort of an interesting sort of meta-data journalism, where it's data journalism that was output from a previous bit of data journalism. Another one here is public alerts. Again, we're just sort of we're telling sort of stories here by showing a big picture. And you can sort of see over here on the left-hand side up near Canada was when there had been an earthquake and a tsunami warning just before Hurricane Sandy hit. And then you can also see that cluster of alerts over on the east coast around when Hurricane Sandy was about to come ashore. And then people could then drill in and find out what was going on in their area. But at the same time, there's both a big picture and a smaller picture view. Sometimes you've got to be a little careful. When you start putting too much data on, it can get a little overwhelming. So this is what happens when you start turning on too many layers on our map. It starts to become a bit of a mess. So you've got to sort of think about simplifying this sometimes and not trying to show too much information at once, because it becomes overwhelming. And users need to be able to visualize, see what's going on. So you can then do things like here, like just simplify it out, where you're just showing relevant stuff about evacuation zones and where the evacuation shelters are. You know, so again, this is getting the information in a form that people can find most useful and most readable. You can also do things with that aren't necessarily obvious. We worked with a mob called a company called Storyful, and they would curate YouTube videos about the flooding during Hurricane Sandy and put them on a map. And it's much more interesting and much more compelling than merely having a list of YouTube videos where you might say, oh, I've been there. I can suddenly, visualize what's going on because I know where this video is. And you're like, oh, I've been there, or I know what that area should look like. And this is what it looks like with the flooding. Clearly something bad is going on. I showed this just before. This is a map showing the replacement shuttle buses. Obviously, when you have flooding and you've got subways, that's not a good combination. So a bunch of the subways in New York were actually filled up with water for a couple of days, or actually a couple of weeks in some cases. And so they had buses replacing them. This then we then put this information online so that people could actually see where the bus routes were going. And again, you could just and there were sites that just had a list of the bus routes. A list of the bus stops, but this people could look at and go, right, where's the nearest one to me? And this seems really obvious, I guess, but it's not. It's something that needs to be sort of hammered home over and over again. You need to put the data in a context that people are familiar with, whether it be a map, whether it be some graphs. You need to be able to show what's going on, and just a list of place names or just a list of numbers isn't as interesting and doesn't tell as good a story as when you put it in a context, a visual context that people can understand. I think we've got one more of these graphs now. This is a data that came in after the disaster, where we were pulling in information from various providers about what was going on with the gas stations. This was a huge area, a huge problem immediately after Sandy. People wanted to know which gas stations were open and had gas. And again, once you put this on a map, people can see what's going on and they can get an idea of where to go. Again, you could just make this a list of names, or you could read it out on the radio going, hey, this gas station has gas. But that's not as useful to people as being able to actually place it in the context of their own lives and where they are right now. And we worked with a bunch of other agencies. So WNYC, which is a local radio station, was doing something similar. They were putting up a map showing where the subway lines were on and off. And they put it in the form of the traditional New York subway map, which people in New York were familiar with. They were familiar with how that map looked. They were, it made sense to them because it's the map of the subway they'd seen every day. For example, there's another example. Many of you are probably familiar with what the London Tube map looks like. Now, for Londoners, that makes perfect sense because they see it all the time. But it actually doesn't map very closely to what the real, map of where the tube stations are. It's just, but it's how they're used to thinking about the tube. So it's about putting stuff in a form that people find familiar. Just a few more little sort of snippets here. I mentioned before about that boat in Japan. This was another little story that came out of our up-to-date imagery when we captured it. You can see in the aftermath of Sandy, in the middle there, a marina full of boats has actually pretty much landed in someone's front yard. And so I think then one of the local journalists, when this was discovered, went around and actually took photos of it and came up with a little story about, you know, a local sort of interest story about the guy who's, you know, suddenly got a whole lot of boats sitting in his front yard. And we can do things like work with other agencies on this data. So this was a crowdsourced sort of a crowdsourced map showing letting people judge the various levels of damage to various areas, again in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. So the data itself then allowed people to draw, you know, sort of we then crowdsourced well, it wasn't us, it was Tom Nod, crowdsourced the information about the sort of people looking at it and going, oh, yep, that building's quite damaged, that's not. And suddenly you've got an overall big picture that's based on all these little pictures, all these little local suburban sort of pictures of damage. And suddenly you've got an overall picture of the disaster itself and how big and bad it was. You know, so people could actually go in here and highlight an area and go, that's a damaged building. And that then became useful for both emergency responders and everyone else to find out what was going on in the immediate aftermath of a big hurricane and flooding. So one thing to bear in mind here is I'm talking about all this stuff. It's just about data literacy. It's about being comfortable with manipulating data. It's actually not that scary. You know, these tools are actually pretty easy to use. I mentioned before there's a tool called Google Refine. It allows you to sort of clean up data sets that might be a bit nasty because they've got spelling mistakes and the like. You know, most people should be familiar with how to do a graph in Excel. These tools are actually pretty easy, and once you actually start playing with them and using them, you'll find, oh, actually that's not too bad at all. We can actually do all sorts of interesting stuff there. One of the things to bear in mind from a journalism point of view is talking to various news services. When they do produce these sort of interactive web pages with all sorts, like the schools map I showed earlier, these pages end up being long-term sort of traffic attractors. Lots of people keep coming back to them all the time. They're not just a thing if you put up once, it's a story for a day and then it goes away. These things are long-term useful. So from a pure sort of, you know, I guess incentive basis, there's actually a lot of reason to do this sort of map, is make this data available to people, let them actually have it, and maybe keep every 6 months, update the data, push it up, and it's there all the time. These tools, as I say, they're not scary, and there's an incredibly high reward from using them. And most importantly, it's all about, you know, again, telling the stories. This is a nice little shot from one of my favorite movies, The Princess Bride. You know, it's all about telling these stories to the world. And it's not that scary and it's not that hard to actually learn to use these tools. A couple of books I'd recommend, and I'll get Robin to send this out to some of the organisers who can forward these on to you. The first one I mentioned is Edward Tufte's The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. Terrible wordy name, but it's a beautiful book and it's incredibly compelling, sort of showing how to actually display information in a way that is clear and that people can understand. Another one, and this is quite expensive, unfortunately, last time I looked, but it's David McCandless' Information is Beautiful. It's sort of almost like a big coffee table book showing some really amazing data visualization, which may be useful to inspire you or to get some ideas of, I could do that, that's not that hard, and that's kind of interesting. And finally, have a look at, there's a book by Nate Silver, who I mentioned earlier, was writing for the New York Times, The Signal and the Noise. And this is his book explaining a lot of how he does this stuff. And just, it's a really interesting book about data literacy and explaining how to use these numbers and how to think about these numbers. And with that, I'll leave it there and I'll get Robin to unmute himself and we'll go to a Q&A. You're still muted, Robin.
I'm unmuted now. All right, I think we've got lots of questions.
I couldn't actually see you there, so I was desperately hoping that when I turned off the presentation that I wasn't looking at an empty screen and I'd been sitting talking to myself for half an hour.
I thought you'd rather look at these beautiful people rather than my ugly mug.
Anthony didn't mention crowdsourcing until the very end. Are these maps, many of them crowdsourced, or is it easy for journalists to set up a crowdsourced map through Google where anyone can contribute to it?
Basically, the question was, you showed a lot of maps.
Yep, I heard that. Okay, so we don't do a lot of crowdsourcing, but plenty of other people do. There's a tool called Ushahidi, which you can use, and I know a bunch of different online news services have actually set these up at various points to allow people to actually contribute, photos and sort of up-to-date information. We typically work with the sort of official data sources and help propagate that out where possible, because there are other people out there doing the crowdsourcing already. As I say, the Ushahidi and the crisis mappers and the like do that, so we work with them. I know a bunch of people that have been doing this sort of crowdsourcing in various as parts of various bits of journalism. I forgot to mention I haven't actually looked at it yet, but I've seen The Guardian now has one of their sort of smaller ebooks out about the data journalism work they do. Based on the quality of their data journalism work, I'd suspect that's a good book to check out.
Yeah, I actually read that Guardian book, and one of the things to know is when The Guardian was tracking riots in London, they used fusion tables for that, which basically is like a mega Excel spreadsheet which you can convert into a map really easily. And basically posted a link saying, if anyone in London sees something really bad, let us know and give us your address. And they used that to map various incidents in real time as it happened. So that's one Google tool you can use at least. Other questions? Google searches through what percentage of total online content? Do you want to answer that?
I have no idea. I'm not from the search side.
I mean, if it's on the public web, it's a lot. I mean, by the way, if you're curious about that question specifically, we can give you more details about how search works. I sense that that's kind of a tone in the room. Sana can give any of you really good briefings on exactly those kind of questions. How much of the web, how frequently we crawl the web, how many sites we crawl each day, things like that. We can go in a separate venue, we can go into that kind of details a lot. Anyone who wants to ask, we're really happy to tell you.
I think there's actually a couple of Google blog posts about that stuff.
Yeah.
There's usually one on the Google Webmaster blog every sort of 6 months or so. They end up with some various updates of statistics and the like.
Cool. Anyone else?
I'd just like to know, these maps are formed because you are able to aggregate content. How do you know that the algorithms that are used to form these trends of maps are correct, and who can check?
Did you hear that, Anthony?
No, I couldn't make it out, sorry.
Basically, I mean, I might have overinterpreted, but it's basically like, okay, so a bunch of people who you don't know are making your map for you. How do you know it's accurate? Is that fair?
Partly it's judgment. And partly it's about sort of form. So, for example, during the Mindanao, during the Typhoon Pablo and Bofa, Eileen Apollo, who's in our Singapore office, had a bunch of volunteer mappers that she'd worked with in Manila before on previous floods and hurricanes, and so we're able to go, yep, we know these guys and we know what they're doing. We know they can be trusted. And sometimes you've just sort of got to have a chat to them and make a judgment call and go, does this seem reasonable or not? And then other times we'll put data up and discover in fact that it's not being updated and it's out of date. And so at that point we'll take the data down. It's like any of these sort of things, it's just a matter of judgment, I guess. It's just a matter of looking at it and making a sort of informed assessment of, is this data useful? Do we feel it's accurate enough that we can actually trust it?
Anyone else?
How easy is it to obtain some of this data, and where does this data actually come from, the official sources, and how long does it take, or how easy or difficult is it to take this data and map it and match that with others that's data?
Did you hear that, Anthony?
No.
Okay, basically it was kind of like, I think then they've just seen an overwhelming amount of data, especially on these maps, and I think you kind of got a bunch of, do you get it from the crowd? How long does it take to get information from the crowd? You got it from official sources. How long does it take from official sources? Maybe just run people through again, like, just how really hard is it to set up a new Shahidi site? How hard is it to download all this data?
A lot of these tools, it's actually not that hard. As I mentioned before, if you go to data.gov.sg, you'll see there's a bunch of data sets you can just grab and put on and download. And if it's geographical data, there are tools like Google's Fusion Table, it really is just a web spreadsheet where you say, right, this column is the place name. And you go, right, turn those place names into latitudes and longitudes. And then you say, now show me it as a map. And it takes, sort of 3 or 4 minutes to do that, and suddenly you've got a map of this data you've downloaded. And as I say, if you look at the data.gov SG site, you'll see there is just a vast amount of this information. As far as the crowdsourcing, that's kind of a, it depends question, unfortunately. Sometimes the crowdsourcing information will come in really, really fast, and it'll be really, really good. That was the case in Christchurch. The local sort of volunteer community did an amazing job in Christchurch of making the information available. Other times, the crowdsourced information, for whatever reason, maybe the area is inaccessible, maybe it doesn't have a lot of internet penetration. Other times, the information just isn't particularly useful. You only get half a dozen people contributing information. It's just, there isn't a hard and fast rule to this stuff, unfortunately. I don't think anyone has an idea of how to guarantee that this will be successful. You've just got to sort of try it and see. And, hopefully over time you can sort of make a judgment call on which bits, what sort of crowdsourced information becomes useful. During a disaster, often you'll see the news services request photos, and that seems to be one that's, fairly successful. People want to share their stories about what's going on in their area with a photo. So they'll send in photos showing, say, the damage to their area or the fact that their area is okay. It's not clear exactly what makes a successful crowdsourcing effort. I don't think anyone knows.
I mean, in terms of first steps, I'll just add the guy who's the data editor for The Guardian was giving a talk in Korea at a conference Google was organizing. I was really excited to meet the guy, and so I was talking to them about the projects that he'd done, and I said, look, how do you recommend I learn Fusion tables a bit better? And he really looked at me like I was such an idiot. And he was like, YouTube. He was like, my first step was I just typed how to use Fusion tables into YouTube, and someone just gave us an hour-long tutorial how to use them, and that's how he started using that. He wasn't a techie at all before he began. He just was really interested in it and really wanted to learn how to do it. So
I'd also encourage you to find other people who maybe work in the same area as you or in the same course as you who are also interested, and that way you can have your own little sort of skill swapping going, hey, I found this cool trick. You do this and suddenly it's like, oh, wow, cool. And I mean, that happens everywhere, but actually chase down other people who are near you who are doing similar, or interested in similar areas, and learn from each other. Apart from this, it's a lot more fun than just sitting at home trying to, get frustrated and not knowing what you're doing. If you can just ask someone, hey, have you had any luck with this?
Another question?
I wonder have you worked with data over a timeline, meaning a long timeline, 50 years, something like that, like the aging of a population, or the decline in poverty in a country or the world, and then showing how that data changes over a very long period of time. Do you have any tips on doing that?
There's a bunch of interesting web animation tools out there that you can do this stuff with. I'll see if I can't. Hang on, let me just. While I'm talking, I'm just bringing up another web page to try to show you an interesting example of some of this stuff. It's called the Google Small Arms Globe, and it's showing the flow of. Here we go. The flow of sort of the arms trade around the world across a period of about 18 years. So I'm just loading it up now in the background, and it's actually it's a really interesting animation, and I believe the code for it now has been open sourced, so it may be useful. I'll see if I can actually make it load. It doesn't seem to want to be loading right now. Darn. If you search for Google Small Arms Globe, you'll find it pretty easily. It doesn't seem to want to load on my browser at the moment. I think I probably need to probably got too many tabs open and I need to restart my browser at some point. But yeah, it's a really interesting sort of animation. And the thing is, all these tools out there, there's a library called D3, which is a tool for helping build these data-driven websites and producing these really interesting, sort of compelling animations. I think the guy who wrote that code now works for, is it the Washington Post or the New York Times? But the code is all open source, and it actually helps you build these things really easily and quickly. So with timelines, one of the obvious tricks is about animating them. You know, showing stuff over time, because it gives you you can sort of see stuff, you know, sort of increasing and decreasing in the animation. Other than that, yeah, and look at tools like D3. As I say, it's a JavaScript library. Don't be too scared. It's not that technical and hard to use. It allows you to produce some quite interesting stuff pretty easily.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Is there a directory where products like Refine, Transparency Report, and other like cool products are listed?
Is there like a single website where people can just go and they'll find all the Google stuff that we've discussed in one convenient place? Or are they going to have to maybe search for each individually and locate it?
I can actually, what I'll do is I'll send to Robin and he can forward it on to, I don't know how, presumably there's an attendees list, a collection of links to all of these various tools that I've mentioned. I'm not familiar with any particular one. I wouldn't be surprised at all to find that people have actually built sites to do that. It never occurred to me to look for them, but I'm sure there are people out who have built these sort of tool sets. You know, maybe look on have a look on the Guardian's data journalism area. The data journalism area. They have a blog about this stuff, and have a look and see if they've put together a page. Otherwise, as I say, I'll get Robin to forward on, or Sana to forward on a list of the tools that I've mentioned.
Any more? Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
If you, have we got time? Could you screen share and just show them Fusion tables? Maybe just do something like that, so they got an idea of how it looks.
Sure. Let me just see if I've got a. Just going to check. I've got a. What am I looking for? Okay. So screen share, desktop. There we go. So what I've got here is you go to Google Drive. Am I screen sharing okay here? I think I am.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And we can go here. Oh, sorry. I don't want create. I want upload more Fusion table. Okay, and that just basically says you can just import an Excel spreadsheet or the like. Now, I'll actually not do that now because I'll instead go to one that I've created before. So let's see if I can find one that's open and that isn't huge and broken. I should have one here somewhere. I'll just sing a little song while I do that. Here's an older one. So this was a list we did during one of the disasters showing the town names for where there'd been power outages. And you can see here that I've got one column which is the location and the town, and then a more accurate location and the times and the like. So what we can then do is go where is it? Visualize as a map. And it literally was that simple. If I jump back to the visualize as a table, all I really needed to do was say, no, not that one. Sorry, they've changed the user interface on me, and I'm trying to remember how it works now. But you can actually, I tell you what, it was just a matter of saying this is when you first go to visualize as a map. It'll say which of the columns in your table has the location in it, and in this case it was the geolocation. And then in the visualize as a map, we go back over here. You can do things like, so when I've clicked on this, I click on an icon here, and it gives the columns from the table. But if I go, oh, that's kind of ugly and I want to make it look more fancy, you can actually just go configure info window, and you can either say, here are the columns I want to include, or you can go custom and actually make your own. You know, put your icon in there, or you know, maybe make one of the bits bolder or something. So you can sort of, you know, do that sort of thing very easily. So say I might want to go, okay, let's put a couple of extra new lines between the the name of the place and the rest of the text, and then I go like that, and suddenly that's there. I can then, if I want to embed that map, I can just click embeddable link. Well, you know, I'd have to obviously make it public, and then suddenly I've got a link, you know, a link to put in a website, or a link that I can send to other people to go, hey, check out my map. And it really is an incredibly simple tool to use to produce really quite nice results very, very quickly and easily.
And where did, I mean, just a perennial question, where did you originally get that map from? The .csv file, was that something that the government gave you?
Yeah, that was something that we got from one of the electricity companies during the flooding in Victoria last year. But, you know, a lot of this data is out there already. As I say, if we go to, you know, sort of the data.gov.sg site, you'll find there's actually a whole, not AU, SG, you'll find there's just a huge amount of this information that's out there, you know, both geographical data and, you know, sort of all sorts of information that you might want to see with links. So you can say go to the public, let's go to say the Public Utilities Board and see if we can't find some geographical data. You know, sort of, yeah, there you go. So they've already got here a bunch of this data that you can actually download of where are the waters projects, where are the ABC waters projects, and they've got it in different formats that you can download and put on a map straight away. Okay.
Okay.
I think I'm about to get kicked out by the cleaners, so because it's getting on towards 6 p.m. here. So I've maybe got time for one more question.
Anyone got a question before he gets kicked out? All right. I mean, there's the camera that he can see. Why don't you give a big round of applause to that webcam over there?
And enjoy the rest of the day, guys. I'll see you later.
Cool. All right. Cool. Actually, yeah, just give me a second. Actually, can you put the laptop back up? Because I was asked by, I guess we have an online audience, to share my slides. So while I'm here, right, I might as well show you how to do this on a regular Hangout. So if we can just put this laptop up. So let's go back to the regular view. So I got my keynote here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to, and this is always the fun part, right? Because I'm about to send you all into infinity, just like Anthony did. You just click on screen share, and then you go to desktop. The reason why you want to do desktop as opposed to keynote is because you want to play the desktop so it fills up the entire screen. So you click on desktop, you share that window, and this is where we go into infinity, so be prepared for the ending of 2001. There you all are, mirrored forever. And then I'm now this, right? So then I go to this and I hit play, and you can't see it, but now my window on the Hangout will look just like these slides. So if you want to do a slide presentation like Anthony just did, it's as easy as that. So there we go. A little bit of revision there. And then let's go to the main slide. I'll just get this loaded up for people. Okay, so this is the YouTube section. I can see that maybe it's already been an hour in a dark room, so I'll try and keep this brief and as exciting as possible. I'm not going to play videos. I know that would get you all pumped up. Maybe that was a mistake not to load up videos. But who here has heard of Psy? Right? Okay. From the laugh, I think most people have. There are people who haven't heard of them. My dad hadn't heard of him last week. I was sort of astonished. I was like, oh, you people really do exist. Who had heard of Psy a year ago? Anyone? Put up your hand if you did, if you're a serious K-pop fan. So one person, and now 1 billion people do, right? So that's kind of, YouTube has changed things a lot, right? A pop musician who'd been in Korea for 10 years, basically aiming himself only at the Korea market, because he chose to upload his video to a global platform, became global just simply because he made such an awesome song and dances like a horse so well. So what does that mean for news? How can you capture that? We're just going to go through 5 sections. This is going to be a lot less philosophical, much more kind of just news you can use kind of stuff. Just a quick overview of the reality of the situation, how you can hunt for news and data using YouTube, similar to the Google presentation I did at the beginning. This is the biggest request we get is number 3. If you have an awesome YouTube video and you're a broadcaster, how can you get the rights to use that video? And number 4, the other question, how do I broadcast on YouTube in a good way? So next slide. Let's just remind ourselves of how these news events are reported. September 11th, fall of the Berlin Wall, the Iraq War, start of it. That mostly happened with people with very expensive camera equipment hooked up to very expensive satellite technology. They were the only people who had the capacity to really broadcast at scale around the world. And contrast that to how we remember recent news events. I saw a lot of the Occupy protests via YouTube. These are videos from Fukushima as well, both from official sources that used YouTube actually to broadcast live coverage, and also just people who uploaded what they saw. I saw my moment where I knew everything changed is when someone just pinged me a link through Google Talk, being like, "Click on this link now," and I clicked on it, and I had no idea what it was. And it went to the White House's website, and it was Obama saying, "We've caught Osama bin Laden," and I was astonished. Right now, for a year before that, even people would have said, "Turn on your TV," right? So that's how much things have changed already. So next slide. Just to remind you the scale of YouTube, we've got 800 million monthly users. So that's not a bad TV audience, right? 1 trillion plus views in 2011. It would have grown much more than that. 72 hours uploaded every minute, all right? Just to reiterate that, every minute, 72 hours are up on upload. So in the time I've been talking to you, I don't even want to do the math because I'm not that clever. But it's a huge amount of stuff just got added to YouTube from all around the world, all different kinds of content. And 70% of YouTube's views come from outside the US. One interesting fact about Singapore is that more than 50% of our views happen on mobile devices. There are not many markets that do that. Korea is one, Japan is one. So you used to talk about the screen in every living room. YouTube is a screen everywhere, right? You can see that it's an astonishing statistic to us. You can see that media consumption is really shifting to wherever anyone is bored at a particular moment. Next slide. So how do you hunt through YouTube to find stuff that's useful to you? If YouTube didn't belong to Google, it would already be considered one of the world's biggest search engines, just in terms of search queries. Just go to it for search, to search for stuff. It's worth doing if you're researching something. Just for personal reasons, for instance, I was wondering whether I should take a train to Chiang Mai in Thailand, and so I just searched train to Chiang Mai, and I had some American who basically said, "Here's what it's like to be on the train, here's my cabin, here's where I go." It's a really handy way to research things. And again, advanced search, kind of like the magic words, right? We want to do Punggol by-election that's happening right now, right? So you say, I just want to see videos from this week, and I also want to see it by upload date, so I can see the latest thing that's been uploaded. Now this could be anything that's partnered to YouTube, right? It could be an official partner, like a big media company uploading stuff, or it could be just someone who happened to pass by a speech and uploaded something on their camera. Next slide. I think this is an even better example. I was getting all these emails literally just before I was leaving to give this talk by a bunch of people saying, hey, the office in Jakarta is completely flooded. Don't expect us to reply to you anytime soon. And then I thought, well, you know, how many videos are there of these floods? So I did exactly the same trick I just did with the Punggol by-election. I typed in Jakarta flood. I made it sort by upload date, and I limited to this week. And literally 1 hour before I'd done that, someone had apparently amusingly found a Mercedes stuck in the flood and decided to videotape that. You've got another one. You've even got a German, right? Jakarta versinkt im Wasser. As you can tell, I can't speak German, but I'm psychically guessing that this means Jakarta sunk in water, would be my own personal guess as to what that means. But you just have to imagine, what are the chances that you'd be able to get in touch with a German who'd witnessed the Jakarta flood from Singapore 3 years ago, right? And, well, yeah, I mean, you can actually get Google to do the actual translation instead of me. It's going to be way more dependable. So, you know, that's, if you want to put together what the Jakarta flood looks like, you can have your correspondent there. You can also look here. Next slide. We've got a similar tool for Google search trends as we do for YouTube. Basically, you go to this URL. There's a blog called youtube.com/trends. Super interesting site. You know, when K-pop started blowing up on YouTube, I remember a post that was like a year ago, and we were like, this is really going to be big. Because we could just see that K-pop relative to other, like J-pop or Cantopop, was being viewed way more outside of Korea than we would expect, especially in Japan at that time. So it was a trend that, you know, I'm kind of happy we were on top of, because it was a year before Psy, really. But we saw it, we could see it within YouTube that something really big was happening in Korea just from this. So just amusingly, I just figured, you know, you can just do cute little things like do it to Singapore, you compare what all ages are doing versus 13 to 17-year-old. And I was talking about K-pop, right? It just turns out that 13 to 17-year-olds, the thing there that they're watching happens to be some K-pop related game show thing. I didn't understand what it was, but apparently it's very appealing to the youth of this island nation. Next slide, please. If you have a very popular video, how do you prove it's popular? You've got the views, right? 30 million views. That's basic. You've got the likes and dislikes. By the way, one of the things that distinguishes Psy from Bieber, the previous holder of the most viewed YouTube video, is that a lot of people dislike Bieber, right? They give him a thumbs down. Whereas Psy is mostly 100% likes, so he's also the most liked video on YouTube. And he was the most liked before he was the biggest. So basically you click on that little graph. I mean, I'm not sure that it really looks like a graph, but I'm going to say that's what it looks like. It's meant to look like a graph. And then you get much more statistics. Now, you can't actually download this, but you can at least see the trend lines. And you can also see stories that kicked off sudden spurs of usage and things like that. And you can also see where it's being watched. We find that increasingly a lot of YouTube videos that you would assume would be local burst out across borders in very strange ways. And it's always very interesting to people if, let's say, a Singapore person has somehow got big overseas. It's a good way to be able to say, and this is being watched mostly in Japan or Italy or even Brazil, you know, that kind of thing. Demographics data, someone was asking before. For this, we do have demographics data. We tell you what the top demographics are. Using others' video content. It's really simple. Lots of ways to use it. Simplest way to use it is just to embed. Similar to what Anthony was showing with how you could put a Fusion Tables map onto your site just by getting the code and putting it into your website. Same principle here. You click share, you click embed, you paste that code in. The YouTube video will appear exactly where you want it on your site. This is what the New York Times did with it. They were talking about digital health records the first time they came in 50 years ago. They had a super long interview with one of these guys. They uploaded it onto YouTube, and then they just put it into the middle of their story, so that at the appropriate moment, if people wanted to take a break from the New York Times' prose, they could watch a video of this guy. Probably in the old days, they'd have just interviewed him with a pad and paper. As it is, they brought along a camera with them, recorded it, uploaded it to YouTube. They didn't have to pay to host it, but when they wanted it on their site, they could show it, right? This is probably one of our biggest requests and one of the things that people get most confused about. Super easy to use someone's video, but the first concept you have to know is that YouTube doesn't own these videos, right? The people who upload the videos own the content. So get in touch with them if you want to use the content. There's good news, it's easy, all right? You don't have to hunt them down. You don't have to hunt down Squirrely 91 across Jakarta to get the video of his flood. There's a simple way of doing it. I'm going to show you. And then in terms of best practices, do put up a YouTube logo on the screen, and to give credit to the original person who put the video up, show their channel name, which is the name of the user essentially. So how do you contact the uploader? Every video will have a sort of username channel there. You go to this part of their site, you go to the right where it's about them, and then if you click on a little arrow, so please do note this, it is kind of tricky to find, but it's easy to do once you know how. You go that arrow and you can block the user. Don't do that to them, all right? Don't want to do that to them. And then you send them a message. One thing to note is you do have to be logged into YouTube to do this. If you have a Gmail account, you'll be able to log into YouTube that way, or if you have a pre-existing YouTube account, you'll be able to log in. The reason for that is really simple. This person needs to reply to you, right? So if you're not logged in, where's their email going to go? So you log in, you do this, and you say, hello, or guten Morgen, if you're talking to the German person in Indonesia, and then you say, Kanan, I haven't your video, and you say, we're a big shot, and we'll give you proper credit, and we love your video. And 9 times out of 10, people are thrilled to have their video appear as part of something bigger. You know, it's very few people who really don't want it to happen. You can also use it to ask for contributions. You can upload a YouTube video just from your desktop or from your phone, right? So here's something the Washington Post did, which is kind of great. They wanted to think about what Martin Luther King's legacy meant at a particular anniversary, and they got a bunch of high-profile people to talk about it, and they also asked people to upload videos of what they thought about it. So you had the videos themselves, and then they took the time to edit them together into a really amazing package. We also have a bunch of videos. If you tell YouTube that your video is part of the Creative Commons, which is kind of like an alternative copyright, which sort of allows people some control over how it's shared, but is much less rigid. So according to those settings, if you declare your video to be part of this program, which is bigger than Google, it's a standard, it's a sort of alternative copyright standard, then you can just basically search for the videos there and remix them creatively. Probably you guys don't know this, but it's kind of a cool thing, which I use quite a bit for, you know, I take endless videos of my baby boy, which is just punishing for other people to watch. So it's still punishing, but I make it less punishing by going to youtube.com/editor, which is just an online editing tool, which will basically mean that you can condense all your YouTube videos of your, I think, adorable kid, and just make it into a quick 1-minute sequence, and you can send it to his grandparents. But you can do bigger things than that, the more ambitious things. All those videos that have been contributed to the Commons, you can do cool things with them. I mean, for instance, if you want an American flag to illustrate your story about America online, it's right there for you to use, right? Next slide. And then there's the final thing. How do you become a broadcaster? Here's what you need, right? Let's go for the really complicated version. You need a camera, a few mics, and editing software. You know, that you think about what it costs to cover the Berlin Wall. If you want to do a really nice video, get a nice camera, a few mics, and editing software. Probably a lot of the people in this room already have a really nice camera that they can use. The mics don't cost that much. Just look them up online, you can get them. And the editing software, you know, I said we had the online editor for YouTube. That's cool enough. But if you get something a bit more serious, you can play around with it a bit more, make it look a bit more professional. But of course, you can just do it with your webcam if you want. There have been people who became stars just by talking into their webcam, right? And they've ended up making quite a bit of money because of it. Or on your phone, if you really want to just go that way. So we take care of all the hosting, and we take care of all the streaming, and we all take, this is a horrible word, but we take care of the monetizing as well. Okay, next slide. You know, what to think about videos. Do interviews, but, you know, be serious about the content. Don't just, like, sit there with a camera and be like, hey, what happened today, right? You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that on TV. Like, don't do it for YouTube. Make it as compelling as you would for YouTube as it would be, and make it really focus on the first 15 minutes as well. That's the thing I'm going to reiterate in the next slide. A lot of sort of rough kind of interview videos will kind of be people just standing there going, okay, so here we are at the TL, and I'm joined by Vinny, who's with me right now, and he's cool. He's just come back from Japan, and he's going to talk about this. So you're in Japan, right? Like, you just got to make your 15 seconds really exciting, convince people that Vinny is the most exciting guy to talk about Japan ever. And whether you do that with an intro roll or something like that, which you can put together, do focus on that. Do start it off with a big bang, and make sure that if you're doing an interview, it looks great. You know, colorful background on a news story is kind of what I basically mean is you can you know, if you're in a big news organization right now and you think of how many reporters have smartphones in their pockets, they might even have smartphones even though you've already given them a BlackBerry. They can record video on that and upload it to YouTube, even if they're doing other things while they're there. You might as well use that as a resource and have video, even if you're just a newspaper with a website. You might as well have that video in your pocket anyway, and have room to have something just to give a flavor of what's the scene on the ground. Product reviews are huge. Any kind of reviews of objects, YouTube is really good for that. There's a site called The Verge, which just does these loving, I don't know how they do it, it's kind of almost slow motion pictures of tablets, and it's like looking at Zsa Zsa Gabor in the 1920s or something like that. It's a really good way to do it. This video is actually Walt Mossberg, who's the Wall Street Journal's reviewer, kind of a sort of icon of American journalism and technology journalism. He just does really good product reviews, right? He mixes up with him talking to a camera with sort of gorgeous, loving shots of what he's talking about. Commentary and audience Q&A, kind of like what we're doing today, but I'll give you examples of other ways to do it. YouTube is really good at that. Instant reactions, instant thoughts from experts. YouTube is really good for that as well. Next slide. So yeah, so the rules of the road. First 15 seconds really count. Include specific calls to action in the video or through annotations. This is something for you to do if you want, but don't forget, like, one difference between YouTube and TV is that you're in a massively interactive atmosphere where people are always wondering what the hell they're going to do next, right? What are they going to do after the video? It's worth thinking about that while you're doing the video. Give them something to do after it. YouTube has a way that basically says, hey, if you're interested in this right now, click through to a website. So you could do that if you wanted. Or if you wanted to basically just say, join the video and visit this person for more, or check out our other videos, or you know, look up this person after it. It's always good practices to do that, to engage with the audience a bit more and sort of acknowledge the medium that you're in the video. And then we already discussed this. This is one from Australia, just a funny guy. As you'd expect, he's way more local, but you can kind of tell his demographics are exactly as you would expect, right? He looks exactly like a guy who would appeal to males, 25 to 50. You know, it's kind of a very funny thing. But you can kind of, it's just sort of a nice way of showing it, and it's like 700,000, so he's racked up a pretty hefty audience for a guy. The New York Times has done a few hangouts. As you can see, this is basically a lecture that's being broadcast on the internet, but Frank Rich had a theme on the war on women. Is there a war on women? And you know, rather than just have him discuss it, as a man, might not be so great. He had a hangout with various people from around the world who could shade this to add color to this commentary. And they're voters, right? You see, it's all the people who had been, it was sort of like, are you being turned off by what the Republicans are saying, right? Why don't you just talk to these people and the people in their living rooms or whatever, talk to them, get their opinions, and then people can watch while it's happening. Now, you can see they've put some production values into it. Like, you can see a few people are in a studio, but there is just one woman, right, with headphones on, staring into the laptop, and it's not too bad for it. You know, I kind of think in Singapore, there's so much potential to do something like this in this region, you know. So many regional experts, so many interesting people just across the border who you'd want to bring into sort of an ASEAN conversation. So many concerns about which way ASEAN is going with different perspectives. I think this would be a good way to do it. Is that me almost done? So let me speed through. The monetizing. If you want us to, we'll put ads in front of your videos and you can skip them. The reason we put skippable ads in front of your videos is that we don't want people to land on your video and watch ads that they just don't want to watch, right? So if they do want to watch the ad, it's great for the advertiser because the advertiser knows this was someone who did want to watch it as opposed to someone who was forced to watch it. And then once you reach a certain level, you get a cut of that advertising revenue. There are people who started very small just with the cameras and the microphones who have given up their day jobs just from YouTube income. It's possible to do if you get the audience. And you can also just host videos on YouTube. This is a Japanese channel. It's an offshoot of Agence France Presse. And you can see it there. Or France Presse, sorry. So here's some local Singapore stars who are both kind of awesome. Have you heard of Mr. Brown? Yeah. And I never know how to pronounce this guy's name, but he's an adorable kid. Someone else can pronounce it for me. You know, here's a father who's made like a Fred Savage out of his own children on YouTube, right? And is just an adorable child. I've learned all my Singlish from this kid, which means I can now totally blend in as a native. You know, I'll just note, this is his channel, right? And when you go to his channel, there's 8 million views of his video. It's not bad for a 3-year-old, right? You extrapolate that for the next 30 years, he's going to be doing well. And when I visited his channel, you know, there's this enormous video, which is basically a gigantic ad that just runs while you decide what video you're going to watch. So it's not a bad deal. He's doing pretty well from small starts, racked up a huge audience, and making a little bit of money. So Q&A. Any questions? Yeah.
Is there a way, does anyone have a say in ads that get thrown out to people when they view our videos?
Sorry, can you just repeat that? I just got a bit distracted.
Ad serving system work.
Oh, so basically what happens is you basically set up the account, you say serve ads against this. At a certain point, if things are going really well for you and the ads are actually appearing, there'll be a notification. For really big partners, if you're a really big company and like to get a huge audience, that conversation would happen right at the start. And then that's
you
it.
Have to sort of, do you, as a, say, a content creator, I put something up, do I have any say at all with whether the ads appear?
Yeah, you can say no ads. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, if you don't want ads, obviously we're not gonna put them on that. Cool.
Do I have to actually sign up if I want ads?
You look at,
part of it?
you know what? Let me get back to you on that. I did this. I haven't made any money yet off my videos of my son. But I did. Someone actually in the Google team, she was in Japan and a monkey started chewing her shoelaces. So that video went viral. And so at a certain point, she got an email being like, listen, you're hitting a kind of threshold where you might start making money. To be honest, you really have to work at it. It's not like she cashed in from that video. You're going to make money if you make great content consistently every week. You're really funny, you're really engaging, you're doing something really different, you're doing something really kooky, you're doing something that you couldn't do on TV, and you really sort of consistently deliver something new, and you'll get it. That's it. Oh, who's this guy? Right? There we go. Oh.
For the YouTube videos, does it mean that if you can download or share, there are lots of downloading and sharing, does it mean that you can use it, like maybe on your blog posting or? Yeah,
so you can't. Sorry, yeah. The question was, can you download and share, right? You can't download videos from YouTube. You can only stream from YouTube. So you just share it via links and that embeddable code. Like you've probably seen YouTube videos in Facebook, right? Like how does that happen? That happens because it's not that complicated, but basically, you know, a YouTube video is appearing on another site. you can put that in your, by the same principle, you can put that in your blog using your own YouTube channel or your own news website or anything like that. And you probably should be doing that. You want your video to appear on as many websites as possible, right? Sorry, a question at the back.
Can I just find out what threshold is for like one and two if you can decide what kind of ads are not allowed to be streamed. For example, you say like shopping ads or don't like gambling ads.
You know, I just can't answer that question. YouTube has pretty strict things already on what we want to appear on YouTube. I mean, we're so easy to access that we just don't want the wrong video to appear in front of Pocoyo for kids, right? So if you give Junie the email, I can give you a proper answer later on.
You can't download YouTube, but I've seen that it can be done.
Not through us. I mean, we're a streaming service. If you want to go for it, it's nothing to do with us. All right. But right, I mean, the main thing to say is don't hunt around YouTube for the download site, for the download button. That's the main point.
Putting political content on YouTube, what do you need to know about takedown procedures and people reporting your content?
Yeah. Basically, the laws of the land will apply to YouTube where we're localized. So we are localized in Singapore. That means your video being shown in Singapore is subject to Singaporean law. So if the video was to be an infraction of that, let's say you just did something super violent, something horrific like that, and it was against Singaporean law, for some reason we take it down. So the law of the land is basically your guide on that question.
But if I use the VPN to say it was uploaded from, so how do you control that?
Right. So the answer there is Singapore gets to decide what's shown in youtube.com.sg, but youtube.com is an American site. Most of you probably are using youtube.com.sg because you probably want to be using youtube.com.sg because it's got the local stuff in it, right? You're probably not interested in how the Raptors did versus the Knicks, or I don't know, that's mixing two sports. But that's why you wouldn't log into the US thing. So for that reason, we kind of feel like that's sort of the appropriate level.
Just a small connected question. I mean, recently, Google stopped allowing separate YouTube accounts. It has to be connected to Google.
We've started linking it. We've now started linking it to Google+. That's something where I'm not clear on the mechanics of that. It's a new thing. Again, if you want to, I can give you an email answer later on.
Is there an intelligent way to edit quickly?
I mean, as a tools you can use, or a principle to edit quickly. Yeah, I find youtube.com/editor for a really rough, really quick editor. That's what I would recommend, in the sense that it's just in the browser. You can access it from any laptop. You can access it from anywhere. It's really simple to use. I mean, the great thing is that it's simple to use. The problem is that it is simple. It can't do everything for you, but you can do dissolves. You can cut out sort of the meandering beginning. You can just focus on the highlights. You can put in title cards. It's kind of like, I mean, just describing it, it is kind of like those 90s home movie VCR editors. Kind of that kind of level. Like, you can make it look more than amateur. You can cut out the flab and focus the video to just what's interesting. For instance, if you're videotaping a big talk, for instance, I would recommend, rather than having one gigantic video, you cut it into 3-minute segments of highlights and post them separately. For instance, and you would do that with the youtube.com editor.
In the event that my company is a partner channel, and somehow my video gets ripped off, and they actually mixed it together with the free content, their own content, and my content, and create a new video.
Okay, so yeah.
Will this be captured by the CMS?
So the question is, will our copyright tracking system identify remixes, right? Let me just give maybe some people don't even know that we have this tool. We have a tool called Content ID, which basically means that once you're on YouTube, you can basically say, YouTube, this is my content, And then you get to decide what other people get to do with it. Some people say, I don't want anyone touching this content. They can't repost it. Other people say, if other people can just say, if other people want to repost it, it's fine. Now, the remix question is really interesting. And let me give you kind of a mind-blowing statistic. Psy allowed remixes, right? After Gangnam Style, there was Singapore Style, right? After Singapore Style, there was Eton Style. There was all sorts of styles right across the world. He allowed that to happen by checking a box, which you could also say, I don't want it to happen. But he was super smart to do that, because not only did it mean that people translated Gangnam Style into their own languages or their own cultures, right? He got a cut of those ads as well. And at a certain point, sort of like if you think of the Gangnam Style family, total views, at one stage when we looked at this near the end of the year, it was like 40% of the total views were these remix videos. So I'd suggest it's not a bad strategy to let that happen, actually. You'd get a cut. You'd get a cut of it.
We'll take one more question because there's another class coming in at 3:30.
How much salaries and
How much?
how much money and for the site?
I can't answer that question. The question is how much money does YouTube earn? The real question you should ask is how much do people make money off YouTube? And I can't answer that question either. Other than, what's that? Oh, we can't reveal partners. We say we don't reveal it, so you'd have to ask him. But you know, if you look at someone like, there are people in Australia. There's Natalie Tran. She's just this wonderful comedian, really super funny woman. She just posts videos into the camera. She's living off YouTube right now. She's nowhere near as big as Psy. So extrapolate to, I don't know, 10 times her, something like that. Yeah.